So my findings have been really quite interesting, somewhat challenging, somewhat surprising, and it's made me very aware of the need to tune into individual people's situations, because I think what tends to be forgotten is that mindfulness originally was a very esoteric practice, practiced by the few, with a kind of a secret knowledge. And I'm not saying we want to keep it secret, but I think we've gone perhaps to the other extreme where it can be practiced by everybody. And I suspect for some people it's quite a mild and moderate activity, but for others it can be quite intense. And if practitioners, teachers, clinicians and so on are teaching others to practice mindfulness and they have not experienced the depth and the intensity that is possible themselves, they may not appreciate how it can be experienced by other people. It can be such a powerful process that it can completely alter our sense of who we are, our relationship to our bodies, minds, emotions, lives. It can have quite a transformative effect, but traditionally meditation was practiced in the context of a teaching and or a teacher and a guide, and that's been my pathway for the last 30 years of meditation. So I think when we're teaching mindfulness in a school or in higher education or a community setting, and we're working with groups, and we don't necessarily know everything about people's backgrounds, I think we need to tread carefully. Hartman's work on thin boundaries, with the thin and thick boundary questionnaire, that material is available online. It's most interesting because he talks about people with thin boundaries being able to move in and out of states of consciousness much more easily. They've got a kind of a liminal capacity to move between liminal states. So it could be very easy for a mindfulness meditation that went on perhaps a bit too long to slip into a deeper state. And of course, some people want to go into this deeper state. But I think people need to be making informed decisions about the kind of practices that they want to do and the context they want to do them in, the kind of support they have, because it certainly can be a powerful trigger for transformation. An example of this is when I first started teaching mindfulness at a postgraduate level in my master's course. I had a young woman in that class who was a teacher, and we just done a soles of the feet meditation, which, as I mentioned, is a grounding and pretty emotionally neutral meditation, and we didn't do it for very long. But after the meditation, I sensed that she was very angry, that quite a lot of anger had come up for her. And she stormed off out of the room, and I was really torn between going to see how she was or staying with the group. And luckily she came back fairly quickly in 2 or 3 minutes or so. So I followed up with her afterwards, and she said she was okay, and she had a couple of good papers. And I ran into her again recently because I was doing some professional development work with her school, and I asked her if she remembered the situation, and she did, and she said, oh yes, that was after that meditation I decided I needed to go and see a counsellor or a psychotherapist, I can't remember which, and we did some work together, and I realised that I'd been sexually abused, and it was a very young child, and I hadn't remembered it, and this meditation brought that up for me. So I think that kind of example really highlights how carefully we need to tread. I know I was teaching on my own, 25 students, I guess. It was my first year. I hadn't done any kind of I don't screen exactly, but I do ask students to write a mindful journal before we meet, and I get them to talk about any previous experiences of mindfulness meditation, including any adverse experiences and any other things in their lives that they think might might relate to this. In my most recent classes, I've had a number of people actually who've identified they have in their backgrounds abuse, trauma, domestic violence, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, ADHD, all sorts of things. So this has been really helpful for me to have that information before we start. I now talk to them around the range of possible experiences people can have, and without wanting to alarm them, but I do highlight that if they have had any trauma or difficulty, just that we're going to take it gently, and if something doesn't feel right, it's a good idea to stop, take some fresh air, have a break. That there's always choice, and that I don't do breathing meditations because in my research I've found that for a number of people a breathing meditation can induce a panic attack if they're prone to panic attacks, or it might not be helpful if they have asthma. I mean, mindfulness meditation can be very therapeutic, of course, and working with a clinician who's very experienced in mindfulness one-to-one is a very different thing than having a group experience of mindfulness in a more education or community setting. I think this is something that hasn't really been appreciated. Having said that, not all clinicians are necessarily aware of the range of experiences either. And I think there's a tendency to see mindfulness as a very light and easy approach, something that's somewhat of a panacea. It's become a bit of a buzzword here in Australia where people are assumed to be helpful if you're a social worker visiting a young pregnant woman or a young mum struggling with a new baby and a toddler and socioeconomic disadvantage and relationship problems and all the rest of it. It's become quite common to sort of for the social worker to try to bring the client into a mindful space, and it seems to me that this is being done without anywhere near enough background and experience in meditation or mindfulness oneself, which it's a journey of many years in my view, a wonderful journey. And I was very hesitant to begin actually teaching mindfulness until I felt really ready, and I'm still quite cautious in terms of the groups that I have, how I use it, when, how much I explain and so on, because I've found there's a whole range of other activities that we can do, such as movement activities and artistic activities, creating mandalas, a lot of really lovely things, therapeutic storytelling, music, a lot of other things that can help to bring about a kind of sense of equanimity or groundedness or presence, that it may not need to involve an actual technique.